Hi, friends. Shug here with Women's Hot Topics. I'm so thankful you came on. Ooh, this is a hot topic. I have wanted to do this topic for years, but there's a lot of fear out there concerning vaccines. And that's what we're going to talk about today, to vaccinate or not. And I have asked some of my friends that are doctors, and they are afraid. I think that's the best term to put it. They're afraid because they might lose their license. No, Shug, I can't come on. I can't talk about this. I might lose my license. But there are some people in America here who are bold, who are standing up for medical freedom. And that is our guest here today. It's a hot topic, parents, and I really want you to listen in because we are going to talk about some interesting points when it comes to vaccinations. So here's a disclaimer I want to make. Everything we talk about here today, I want you to look through the lens of prayer. I want you to consult your doctor. I want you to do your own research too. This is an opinion. These are things that we're talking about, but I want you to keep an open mind because it's really valid and it's very important. Some of our conversation today will reflect the following: the pros and cons about vaccine risks. Shots in infants. Can you delay some of these? What are the disease risks if you decide not to get vaccinated? Which ones should you vaccinate against if you can only do a few? And can you only do a few? And what are the risks and side effects of vaccines? We're going to talk about autism and vaccines. And is there any long-term illnesses as well that we have to pay attention to with the risks of vaccine? So after researching this topic, Jill Hunt, my executive assistant, found Dr. Bob Sears. Dr. Bob, welcome to our show.
Thanks, Shug. This is my favorite thing to talk about, so I really appreciate you having me on.
You have a wonderful biography. You actually went to the same school my daughter did in DC. So I'm just so glad that you're on with us. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I'm a practicing pediatrician in Dana Point, California. I did my training at Georgetown University School of Medicine way back in the 90s, the early 90s. And then I did my pediatric training at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. So I feel like I had very excellent, top of the line pediatric training. And then ever since then, I've raised my family. I have two grandchildren, and I continue to practice pediatrics here in Southern California.
You know, I feel like a stalker, Dr. Bob, because I was in your website and I was looking at your books, and you've got this great podcast called Vaccine Conversation. We're going to get to that in a little bit in the show. I want all of you listeners, if you want to look them up, please find them at Dr. Sears, drbobsears.com. Look up also the vaccineconversation.com. And I think it's really important that you do the research too. I'm going to bring this to the forefront really for the point of whetting your appetite to find out more, to get more details. You know, ladies, we need to be our best advocate when it comes to our kids. And my husband and I, during COVID, decided not to get vaccinated. We investigated it. We decided accordingly between the two of us. And so consult with your spouse. Talk about this. Talk to your doctor. This is not anything that is a light conversation. I think it's really important that you become educated. And don't forget to pray, girls, because God will guide you accordingly. So, Dr. Bob, pros and cons of vaccines. How did you start to get into medicine liberty? What happened in your life that you decided to look at this from a different perspective?
Well, I think it went all the way back to Georgetown Medical School during my training. And when I realized I was going to go into pediatrics, the CDC did something very interesting that I found confusing as a doctor. They put the hepatitis B vaccine onto the infant vaccine schedule. And they recommended that every baby in America get vaccinated for hepatitis B. And fast forward to now, it's actually mandated for preschools and for school attendance for all young children in many states, across America. And that confused me because hepatitis B is a sexually transmitted infection, or you can catch it by sharing IV drug needles. And those are two things that babies don't do. And so I was confused. So when I saw the CDC do something so strange, I mean, it's one thing to recommend polio vaccine or measles vaccine, but it's another thing to recommend a vaccine for something that babies have zero risk of catching. And so when I saw the CDC do that, I decided, well, I'm gonna scrutinize everything the CDC is telling me regarding vaccines. I'm gonna investigate all of it. And so that's really what opened my eyes to this issue with vaccines. And there are two sides to the story, and everyone should get educated, including me as a pediatrician. And so that started me down that road. And fast forward to 26 years later, I'm where I am now because of that one thing that the CDC did.
I think that was a God appointment. That's just me and my faith. I think God was going to reveal this to you in the research. This is a really risky conversation. There's a lot of persecution that goes along with this. My friend, Dr. Scott Jensen, also same thing. Senator Scott Jensen has run into that same issue with medical liberty. This is what we're talking about. In fact, I was on the phone this morning with a girlfriend of mine whose daughter has got this wonderful son, and they have decided not to do vaccines. Can you share with us, can you illuminate for us, for the moms that are listening, kind of the pros and cons, vaccinate or not?
Yeah, and I like to also include those in the audience who vaccinated their children many years ago. And because a lot of us did that, right? We just did what the doctor ordered way back then. And I don't want anyone to feel bad for vaccinating in the past. And I also want people to realize, if you are kind of in my generation, back when we were getting vaccines and when my parents were deciding about vaccines, there weren't a lot of vaccines that we were giving kids. We gave kids the size of the vaccine schedule back then was maybe this size compared to now. It's like it's tripled. It's more than tripled in the last 25 years. And so when you're even having the vaccine conversation, it's completely different. And so what I like people to do is understand why we're having this conversation today. A lot of older people think, well, vaccines saved all of us. It saved all of our lives. You're crazy not to vaccinate. You got to do your part like I did 80 years ago and like I did with my kids 50 years ago. Everyone has to do their part. Well, what we're asking parents to do today is a completely different thing than what a lot of us did with our kids many years ago. All right. So I like to frame this discussion in that kind of picture because I want people to understand why parents are questioning this. I don't want people to ridicule anybody for questioning or put them down or think they're crazy, because what they're questioning today is not what you faced years ago. And there's this great online photo. It shows like an elderly grandmother holding a sign saying, "I'm fully vaccinated." And it just says like polio and tetanus. And then her daughter, who's an adult, says, "I'm fully vaccinated." She has like 5 vaccines. And then a little child's holding the sign, "I'm fully vaccinated." And there's over 70 doses of vaccination given to that child. So put in that framework, there's no wonder parents are questioning it. And I think that's important for people who are older today to realize why the younger generation is questioning it.
And there's the ethical pressure too. Oh, if you don't vaccinate your kids, you're hurting America. We heard that with COVID too. If you don't get vaccinated, you're getting us all sick when you carry it. And I know that I had watched a wonderful video that you have on your site, drbobsears.com. I really want you guys to go to it, sign up, get in there, get educated. And you talked about that there are common and uncommon illnesses which you could vaccinate against on some and maybe not all. Would you share that, please?
Yeah. It's a very important concept for people to understand if they're deciding whether or not to vaccinate. And it's actually some good news. The good news is that all the very severe and potentially deadly diseases that we vaccinate against are all extremely rare or have been completely eradicated from our country. Anything that's going to put your baby or your child at a high risk of being harmed from that infection is so rare that it's very unlikely to happen. And then all the common things that may happen are fortunately manageable and mild in most cases. And to sum up all that in one sentence, it's every disease that is severe is extremely rare. And every disease that is common is mild. And so the effect of that is if you don't vaccinate your child and you raise a child vaccine free, like I like to say, the chance your child is going to be harmed by an infection is extremely low. And in my 26 years of being a pediatrician, I have actually never seen one single child harmed by an infection because they didn't vaccinate. All my patients who raised their kids vaccine free, not a single one has been harmed by an infection. And that's a great testament. You know, if anyone should be seeing kids harmed, it should be me. I should be seeing kids die and be harmed left and right from infections if what the CDC says is true for those who don't vaccinate, and it's not true. And so that's great news that people who are caught in this decision right now, you don't have to live in fear of infections. Yeah, you could respect them and understand them and get educated about them. But my experience so far, no one has ever regretted not vaccinating in my very large practice of 26 years.
That's a huge point. Repeat that again. Nobody has ever
regretted not vaccinating. Because they've never seen their child suffer harm from infection. I've seen infections, of course. I've seen measles and I've seen pneumonia and I've seen whooping cough and hepatitis A is little food poisoning. I've seen mumps. I've seen these, of course, I've seen COVID and the flu. These are all infections that kids get through and they get through them just fine in the vast majority of cases. So I feel blessed. I think God is looking out for both me and my patients when they make this natural choice to raise their kids naturally and let their immune systems, develop and mature naturally. So far I feel very blessed that no one's ever regretted that decision.
You made a really good point on your video that I watched where you had mentioned that some moms and parents decide to delay it. It's okay to delay. Have your baby, have your infant. In fact, share a little bit with us why it might be a benefit to delay some of those versus doing them right when they're an infant.
Yeah, and it's important, Shug, to realize this is not a scientific statement that I'm about to make. It's definitely a matter of opinion because there's not good research on this. But the theory is if you give children vaccines when they're older, say 4, 5, 6 years old, and their nervous system is completely developed and their immune system is completely developed, their body is hardy. They've been exposed to lots of other toxins, in the environment and their foods and in the air, and their body's used to detoxing, and they can handle certain chemical insults on their body. And if you give vaccines to kids in that state, that perhaps they handle them better and they're less susceptible to injury compared to a brand new baby with a brain and a nervous system that's trying to develop. If a baby does get injured by vaccines, and if their brain or their nervous system or their immune system is very negatively influenced by vaccines, then those effects can be very, very powerful on their body because you prevent things from developing later down the road because you've injured them at an early stage. And I'm not saying that vaccines are going to do that to everybody, but it is very clear from the medical literature that a very small proportion of infants are neurologically injured by vaccines, or their immune system develops problems such as allergies or autoimmune problems from vaccines. And when you do that young, the effects can be profound. And when those negative effects are given to an older child, their bodies perhaps will handle it somewhat better.
A little bit better.
That's my theory. That's my observation so far based on my experience as a pediatrician. But until someone actually researches it, we can't actually say for sure that it's true or not true.
Well, since this is such a hot topic, how come the CDC is not researching following children who did not get vaccines versus the children who did?
You know what? I would love the answer to that as much as you and our audience would, Shug. Our government actually asked the CDC to research that about 10 years ago. And I don't know why they have to ask the CDC to do anything. They should be able to tell the CDC what to do since the CDC is a government agency. The CDC said no. They said, the researchers said there, we are not going to research it. And that is the biggest question we need to answer. It would be so easy to take a group of 10,000 children whose parents have decided not to vaccinate and compare it to a group of 10,000 children whose parents have decided to vaccinate, have them all get monitored very closely by a pediatric group of researchers, you do lots of follow-up and see what the outcome is. There have been some small studies that have done just that, but only with a few hundred kids. And any study that has looked at that has shown that unvaccinated kids are much healthier and have far fewer medical problems, far fewer ear infections, fewer respiratory infections, fewer allergies. They have better intellectual development, fewer developmental problems. And compared to the kids who are vaccinated, but the studies are not large enough to make any claims. They're too small. So I hope I would strongly say that every parent will continue to question this and not trust the CDC on this until they can prove that their vaccinated cohort of children are far healthier and that the unvaccinated kids are dying left and right of disease. And again, parents that don't vaccinate think the opposite is true. They think their kids are much healthier and much less susceptible to infection and disease. And so it's interesting. Let's do the research, Shug. Let's ask the CDC and make the CDC do the research.
And, there's no voice like a mother's. So we need to be the ones speaking out, ladies. God's given me this platform and this opportunity to present this to you. It's up to you to take it and run with it. And I'm not saying don't get vaccinated. I'm not saying, the vaccines are bad and terrible, but we just need more study on this. And, I've got just a small example in my own family where it was really a clashing of thoughts as to get vaccinated or not for COVID. My husband and I prayed. We decided not to get vaccinated against it. My other part of my family did get vaccinated against it. They still got COVID. They still got sick. I got COVID because I have low immunity, probably from all those immunizations I had. I've got a few autoimmune diseases. Maybe it's because of all those vaccines I had as a kid, but we don't know. But my point I'm trying to make is that it was not milder for them. I did not see that. They might say I got vaccinated, it's milder, and they got all these boosters where we did not. And I would like to think that we survived it just fine. Now, I don't want you guys to misunderstand. It was a tragic and terrible time. People did die. It was terrible. Don't get me wrong. I'm just talking about medical liberty, the opportunity to choose. Don't tell me what I have to do. And so there's a lot of mandatory vaccines out there in schools. How are moms trying to navigate around that when they don't want to vaccinate their kids?
It's hard here in California, Shug, where I practice, because vaccines are mandated for schools. And I give at least one vaccine dose in my office every day to a family who have decided to vaccinate their child. And all my patients wait until their kids are 4, 5, and 6 to go through the vaccines, and they only give the ones that the schools mandate. But it's really tough, and it's a shame. And I think people saw what happens during COVID. What happens when there's this disease threat and the government decides everyone needs to be vaccinated or else, and they give you a vaccine that honestly doesn't work any better than the flu shot. And many of us knew that back when they made the vaccine, and they never proved that it prevented transmission. And they might have shown that it reduces disease severity, like maybe the flu shot does that, but we know the flu shot doesn't prevent transmission either. And we knew everyone was going to get COVID, regardless of vaccination, just like everyone gets the flu. And so, but what did you see our government do? And half of our society got behind the government on this. You shun people who don't vaccinate, you ridicule people, you belittle them, you fire them, you kick them out of your family, you don't let them into your home. When the government tries to turn us against each other, we know something's wrong.
Oh, yeah.
we, the citizenry of this country, we are one body of people, and we should never let the government turn us against each other. And that's what they tried to do with COVID, and that's what they actually try to do with the childhood vaccination schedule. Doctors are trained to teach their patients, don't let anyone unvaccinated around your baby because they're a danger. Don't let them into your home. Don't invite them over for family gatherings. Don't let them into your schools. Let's pass a law so they can't interact with your children. Governments have done that to certain subsets of the population in the past and have convinced their populace that those people are dangerous. Those people are dirty. They're contagious. We need to put them in their own areas and not let them mix with society. We've done that before. And I fear that that's what we're doing with vaccination status now. Whereas in my experience, 26 years, children who are raised vaccine free pose no danger to anybody. They might actually be healthier. And I like to see vaccinated and unvaccinated families coexist, gather together, be friends, love each other, accept each other's medical choices, that are different, and then move on and don't let the government, separate us.
You brought up a really good point on your website, which is drbobsears.com, friends. I want you to check it out because I learned a lot. My kids are 40, but I learned a lot. It's not too late. But I think the point that you brought up, which is really good, is some moms are brand new infants. My niece is going to have a child, my goddaughter. And as a mom, you get, freaked out. I can't get my kid. If I'm not going to vaccinate, I'm not going out. We're not taking socially, etc. Would you share a little bit what you shared on your website about keeping your children safe?
Yeah, because this is, the majority of my patients ask me the same thing. I tell parents, feel free to live a normal life with your baby if you choose to raise them vaccine free. You can go out, you can visit friends, you can go to church. What I tell everybody is enter those environments with your baby wrapped up on your chest in a baby carrier, like a sling or a wrap, some sort of baby carrier where the baby's in your own personal space. People are going to respect that. People aren't going to walk up to you and give you a big hug and put their hands all over your baby if that baby is safely secured on your chest. They're going to, talk to you. You can chat with people. They're going to, look at the baby, but it kind of gives you a little bubble around you. I'm not going to say a 6-foot bubble because that's not necessary, like they told us during COVID. But it gives you this bubble around you so that if the person you're talking to, if they sound sniffly, if they turn their head and cough, if their voice sounds funny like they're sick, you can kind of gently back away or go outside. You can, if you enter a place with a baby and people there seem like they have a cold or a flu or a little sick, take the visit outside. Meanwhile, you protected your baby's in your own personal space. And I feel like you don't have to live in fear. You can make wise choices, wise decisions to live your life normally without fear of disease because you are controlling that.
It's funny you bring that up because everything you mentioned, I have low immunity. So everything you mentioned, I do.
Yeah.
If they're rubbing their nose, if they seem sick, it's just common sense. And you have clearly said that you have watched families with non-vaccinated kids live a healthy, wonderful life. The biggest challenge is the mandates, the mandatory. If people go to private school, and every state is completely different with the requirements. Do they need to have those vaccinations for private school?
They do, Shug. In California and New York, those are the two states with the strongest mandates. Every school mandates these. And most of my patients now homeschool. Most of them won't vaccinate, and so they homeschool.
That's a good point.
And a lot of people have banded together and created group homeschools. They've hired a teacher and they create little grade levels and they actually make their own schools. They don't have to follow the vaccine law. And I've also seen some church schools not enforce the vaccine law. Ever since COVID, a lot of churches are realizing, hey, this is an issue of religious liberty. All of our churchgoers should have the right to send their children to a Christian school or a Catholic school or a Jewish school or an Islamic school. I mean, whatever have you, whatever religion you are, the government has no right to tell you your child can't attend that religious school.
Mhm.
And so a lot of churches are starting to realize that, and they're not enforcing the state's vaccine mandates. And that's between them and the state, and them
Yeah.
and God, of course.
Yeah.
And
Friends,
but so a lot of my patients will seek out those schools now as well. But like I said before, some of my patients vaccinate, and I take them through the process one at a time, very slowly, so it's as easy on their body as we can possibly make it.
mm, friends, I did a show on homeschooling, and on that show, we went through the steps of how you can join a co-op, like Dr. Bob Sears just mentioned. And over 1 million families in 1 year have transferred over and decided to homeschool their kids for really medical freedom, medical liberty, freedom of choice, the education that you want your kids to be able to grasp onto, and other things you don't want them to grasp onto. It was a great show. We'll post that below with the number, and I want you guys to look that up. As we talk about vaccinating and being healthy, not healthy, some of the side effects, some of the detriments of being vaccinated, autism comes up a lot in conversations with moms. Autism seems to have become even more prolific. Do you feel, you've written a book on autism, do you feel that there's a correlation between autism and vaccinations?
That is a wonderful question. I have definitely seen patients regress into autism immediately after a round of vaccination. I've seen it happen. I've talked to over 1,000 parents who have told me they had a healthy, happy, talking, regularly developing child. And then around age 1, age 1.5, or sometimes even younger, they're doing vaccines, and then they give one big round of vaccines, and they completely lose their child overnight. And it's hard to say, it's hard to discount that, Shug, when you see it happen overnight, the night that they're vaccinated. And we know that a minority of kids can be neurologically harmed from vaccines. It's really hard to say that vaccines can't be the cause of that. When you look at the actual research, it's you can't really say one way or the other. Research has not proven vaccines are not responsible, but they also have not proven that vaccines are responsible. Like the research kind of shows both ways, and it's a very hard thing to research. And so I will honestly say that I still don't know, Shug, because I have seen unvaccinated children develop autism, pretty mild. I would say a lot of cases I see in unvaccinated kids are mild. I've probably seen about 10 cases. Um, Autism that I've seen that, according to the parents, happen right after a big round of vaccination, that tends to be a lot more severe, and the change in the kid is a lot more sudden. But whether or not it scientifically can be shown the vaccines are the cause, it's really hard to say. So I think you have to put that in the question mark column.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a lot of my patients, I would say, it's not, they don't necessarily skip vaccines because they're worried about autism. They just want to raise their kid more naturally in general. They don't eat GMO foods. They eat as organically as they can. They don't use pharmaceuticals unless they're really important. They try to live a nice, healthy, natural life. And those are the families. I mean, it's so ironic that so many people will do that, but then they'll give their kids 70 doses of vaccines, every single one of which has all those things in it: chemicals, GMO ingredients, and artificial
Aluminum.
ingredients. And so I think people are wising up to that if you are one of those families that wants to live completely naturally, vaccines they're not really in step with that kind of approach.
Sure, sure. All good points. Friends, please go to drbobsears.com. Sign up. It's worth it. And I want you to go and check out the videos. I want you to look at their podcast conversations on vaccines, the books. Share with us a little bit about the books that you have on there, please.
Well, of course, there's the vaccine book. That's kind of my flagship book that I just updated a few years ago, which is great. I put a chapter on the COVID vaccine in there that's very thorough. I wrote a book called A Tale of Two Sides. It's actually a fictional version of the vaccine book. It's kind of like the vaccine book, but told in a series of interrelated stories that educate you on everything you need to know about vaccines. But for me, I'd say my favorite book is One Doctor versus the Medical Board. And I know you said you had Scott Jansen on your show, right?
Yeah,
And he's kind
yes.
of experienced this as well. I basically wrote what ended up being a fictional version of what happened with me and my journey fighting with the California Medical Board. And I basically laid out the 8-year battle that I had with the medical board and how it influenced me, how it affected me, my personal struggles. And I don't, it's not a biography because I feel like that'd be boring. Just reading about me crying about myself, for 200 pages. I wove it into what I think is a very entertaining and interesting and exciting, in some cases, a story about how this all played out. And so, yeah, it's all. Some of these are exclusive on my website. Some of it's on Amazon, but some of it I only sell on my website. And yeah, I love writing. It's very therapeutic. It's a lot of fun.
Well,
A lot of fun.
what I enjoyed is you also had a kind of like a blow by blow or chapter by chapter podcast where you're talking about that book and what your thoughts were or how you came about to write it. So, I mean, I loved being able to see how those two went side by side. And I know that you've had a lot of persecution, standing up for what you believe is right and medical liberty. Friends, I want you to remember that. He's not saying don't get an immunization. He is saying research, know your choices, know your vaccines. There are, if I'm understanding you correctly, there are children and families out there that are living happy, healthy lives, vaccine free. Let's turn to adults for a minute, if I can.
Yeah.
And vaccinating adults. You had made a comment that I thought was really interesting. All the immunizations we, of course, got when we were kids are pretty much dissolved and gone. Do you
Right.
think we should be getting immunizations as adults, flu shots, etc.?
Yeah, that's I've never had a flu shot myself. You know what? It's interesting, Shug, is adults don't handle the vaccines that we give children very well. An adult immune system is actually a lot more reactive and hyper reactive to a lot of vaccines compared to the child's immune system. So we actually can't give adults certain childhood vaccines. Like when an adult woman gets an MMR shot, they have a very high risk of developing permanent rheumatoid arthritis
Mm.
or other autoimmune problems. When we give them a chickenpox shot, they can actually get a shingles flare up. And so that's why we don't give a lot of these to adults. But the things we do give to adults, like the flu shot, COVID vaccines, I never give medical advice to adults, Shug, but myself personally, I don't get vaccines because I feel like even though vaccines will give you some artificial immunities to that specific germ, I do feel like they temporarily make your immune system less healthy because the germs that are given to you are so artificial. Your immune system hyperreacts. It creates an allergic response and an autoimmune response, as well as an infection fighting response. Your entire immune system responds to that vaccine in a very unnatural, artificial way. So then your immune system, I feel, and this is very theoretical, your immune system can't respond naturally as well when other germs come along. And it can make you more susceptible to these things.
Mm-hmm. You brought a
And
good.
we need good immune systems. We need healthy immune systems. Yeah, and what I say in my video on my website is your immune system doesn't only protect you from the flu and COVID, it protects you from cancer. It prevents autoimmune disorders from happening if your immune system's healthy. You need your immune system to do all kinds of things for the rest of your life. And cancer prevention is probably number one. That's probably more important than disease fighting protection. And if your immune system is very unhealthy and can't do its job, then you could suffer a lot of problems as you get older. So I'm not saying that that vaccines will cause all those problems later. I'm saying this is a theoretical idea that if vaccines make your immune system less healthy because they're so artificial, could that raise your risk of growing up with a much less healthy immune system? It's something the CDC could very easily answer with some research, but they won't.
Mm,
And so I think that's something, that's why more and more adults are beginning to realize that and they're not vaccinating themselves. And more people are choosing to raise their kids vaccine free as well.
yeah, yeah, good point. As we close here, Dr. Bob, there's just so much to cover. Again, friends, please go to the website, Dr. Bob Sears, SEARS.com. Look up these things, sign up. It's worth it for you, for your family. Even if you're a grandma, look it up. If you're a parent, look it up. It's really important. If you've got a niece like I do who's going to have a baby, go in there, research it, discover it, and find it out. Um, is there anything that's on your heart right now as we close? That is kind of a current event or something that's happening that we should hear about from you?
Yeah, I feel like when kind of like what you alluded to at the beginning when you talked about how you've asked doctor friends to come on the show and talk about this and they're too scared. Well, of course, most doctors are very pro-vaccine. And most doctors who would watch this particular episode would be screaming at the camera saying, "Oh, you're so wrong. Vaccines are amazing. Vaccines are 100% safe. They've never hurt anybody. Everyone has to vaccinate. Vaccines will make you healthier. And if you don't vaccinate, your child will die." That's what most doctors would actually say. I would ask these doctors to prove it. If you are so right, and if what you're saying is right, it would be the easiest research study to do in the world. It would take you very little money, very little time and effort to put these two cohort groups into a research study and study their health comes. I
Mhm.
dare you to do that research. Or what they'll tell you then is, oh, we've already done the research. Just look at all the research we've done. It's right there. Ask them to show you one study that has done that, and they can't. There's not a single study with any vaccine or with any group of vaccines or the whole schedule that has even looked at that. Right? They
Wow.
can't show you one, and they'll sort of stammer their way through it or kind of try to blow you off like you're crazy for even asking, because of course the research is there. Well, the research is not there. No doctor can claim it is. And until they can show us that research, I don't feel like a doctor has the right to yell at us or belittle us for asking these questions and having these theories. So that's my challenge to doctors who disagree with these ideas. Do the research.
Hmm. Do the research. And you know what I think? You know me, I'm always speaking it like it is, girls. Follow the money. Pharmaceutical is a big industry. It's huge. And there's a lot of money in it. And I think the most important thing we can do is pray, ask God for wisdom, discernment. In the book of James, first chapter, it tells us that if you would like wisdom to ask for it, and God will give it to you without finding fault. And so I think that's really important that we pray, we lift it up to God. You discuss it with your families, you discuss it with your doctors, but do your own research, girls. I want you to be your own advocate. Get out there. We have given you one option to look at, and I hope that you will look up drbobsears.com, check it out, become knowledgeable. And thank you, Dr. Bob, for coming on. Please come back on again.
Yep. Thank you, Shug.
Thank you very much. Women, I love you. Over and out.